welcome Jacqueline Hargreaves to the Keen Yoga podcast.
Thank you, Adam. Nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Lovely to have you. Yeah, lovely to have you. And you run the Luminescent, I know that. What would you call yourself? Because, I mean, people mention you in the kind of academic terms because you're obviously in the academic field, but you say about yourself that you're not. You're more a practitioner than an academic, I think. So how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I guess I came to yoga, funnily enough, to try and remove labels. I guess I would say I'm a scholar practitioner, although I don't have an academic position, if you like, nor do I pursue research formally through any academic channels. But I certainly have a very strong interest in continuing the research and study of yoga. So, yes, probably my best description, I would be an independent researcher, because that seems to encompass all things, and it's very fluid and dynamic, and I can change it depending on the situation.
Exactly, that's what you want, a definition that's kind of ambiguous, that you can kind of morph in. You're not caught up in being one thing. So I suppose it's actually quite a good idea. It wasn't really on purpose. I was just kind of thinking, oh God, I haven't really found out how to introduce you. So it's kind of an interesting start. But let's rewind now to ask you, the obvious question. I know that you're an engineer, and you're working in India for a number of years with Jet Airways and setting up call centers, etc. So you have a let's say a corporate, business background. You've lived that lifestyle, and I'm assuming that at some point, that lifestyle felt a bit lacking in some form or fashion. And how did you kind of transverse between that and the yoga?
Yeah, I guess it was quite an extraordinary situation for myself. Training, if you like, my education in engineering took me at the end of my honours degree immediately overseas. Like my work took me immediately all over the world, traveling to different projects. And the last few years of my engineering career, if you like, were in India. And it was in India, and funnily enough, the Goa scene, which I know you were sort of part of a little bit of that in the 2000s, but the Goa scene was more, not so much yoga focused, but perhaps a bit more transcendental dance and that type of place. It wasn't really the scene that I was involved in, because I was very much involved in the coming of the digital age to India. And that meant, laying fiber optic cables from Mumbai airport through to communication centres, and the great desire and also skill of the Indian people, which was to bypass some of the industrial process of laying copper cables and so forth. They were going straight for the top in terms of technology, and I had quite an extraordinary experience living there and working on projects like that. But yes, for me, it was this process of living what people live now. Actually, so this was like in the 90s, early and mid 90s, living like a nomad. So working from project to project around the world and online. My whole work I carried with me, and I worked 24/7 because I was working. I was based in Australia, but had clients in Southeast Asia. But my company that I worked for was a US-based organization. So I was sort of doing a 24-hour clock, contactable all the time. And nobody else was sort of doing it. Of course, there was a few people doing it at that time, but it wasn't a global phenomena, if you like. It was something that I couldn't really explain to people. This is how my life is. The boundaries are really blurred between personal life and work life. I could get called anytime, any day, and would need to be, there. And so I sort of found, first of all, that I realized I wasn't sleeping particularly well. And that came about by undertaking meditation. So I started to pursue meditation privately, not related to my work in India, but privately I undertook some study and was very interested in meditation. And it was when I started to do that quite seriously on my own that I realized for the first time that the sleep that I was having was not particularly good sleep. So during the night, when I was lying down, my head was actually solving problems. So I'd get up in the morning and think, oh, I've got all the answers. Here they are, bang, 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 bang. But it also meant the quality of my sleep was not particularly good. And that kind of planted the seed, if you like, of pursuing practices more seriously. Also because I felt perhaps, particularly my case in engineering, there wasn't necessarily any role models that I could see in life that I admired. It's one of those things about women going into these industries where we don't necessarily have the centuries of support behind us. Even if you want to be at the forefront of feminism, if you like, and pursuing a non-traditional career, you're faced with not exactly knowing where to go. Like, no one to handhold you if you face a difficult time, or seeing someone that's an aspirational role model and saying, "Oh, that's the direction I'd like to go in." And so the role models that I saw, I didn't necessarily want to pursue that same life, and so I felt it would be a little bit unfulfilling, and so therefore I chose to pursue meditation practices more full time, and then also move into the area of yoga specifically. But that kind of came after meditation for me. I wasn't as physically.
What type of meditation were you doing?
Mainly Zen-based meditation, but I started with I started with Thai Buddhist monastic practices within a school in Bandanoon in Australia, where they have the Thai Buddhist monastery, and started to do retreats there, private retreats, that type of thing. And then thought I'd pursue it full time. So I took some leave from work as an engineer and took 6 months leave without pay. And then that led to a year.
Yeah. And I think you kept on doing that. Yeah. But I think, outside of the yoga, I think you make a very salient point there, which is worth emphasizing, is that, in the workplace, regardless of being an engineer and pursuing essentially what would be seen by some as a kind of, a fairly kind of feminist perspective in a male workplace, right? Yes, not having any role models is really, really important to recognise.
I didn't recognise that until later.
Because you do need to see people somewhat like yourself to get a grasp of your trajectory. And I think that's outside of perhaps the ostensible nature of the podcast, I think that's a really relevant point you've raised. So thanks for that. And I suppose going on, what happened next? I know you did a little bit of Ashtanga yoga. You dabbled in a little bit of Ashtanga, I think, with Eileen, didn't you, in Australia or something like that? Is that right?
At the same time as pursuing meditation, that was my first exposure, I guess, to like a proper, my aunties in the past had done some yoga, so it wasn't a foreign thing to me, but I had not pursued it myself personally. So for me, my first sort of course, if you like, a beginner's course, I signed up to Yoga Moves. I was living in Darlinghurst at the time, so I signed up to Yoga Moves in Darlinghurst and did a beginner's course there. But actually, the funny thing was, my life at that time, which was still in engineering, I couldn't even complete an 8-week course because my life didn't enable that, right? It didn't enable me to be in one place at one time to complete a program. And this was one of the I guess aspects of my work life which I found quite challenging, that I couldn't pursue things that were of interest to me because my work demands were just so overwhelming. So I had to sort of put up a proper boundary around that so that I could do things of my passion more precisely, give them time. So exposure was Yoga Moves and actually seeing people, practice Mysore style practice. I did attend a couple of classes, and, people the practitioners at that time were just extraordinary, so capable and wonderful and very inspiring practitioners at Yoga Moves. Yeah.
And it's come around a full circle that we'll talk about in a little bit, because obviously you did you made a film, I believe, on with Ashtanga practitioners practicing from the yoga Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati. Is that how to pronounce it?
Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati.
I never get this one right.
Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati.
Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati. Yeah.
So hatha meaning, of course, hatha.
So we'll talk.
Vyasa meaning abhyasa,
Yes.
as in practice, and
practice,
paddhati meaning
Paddhati.
It's like a manual or a guidebook on the practice of hatha yoga.
Right. Okay. Kind of makes sense then. So I mean, one thing that Jackie's potentially most well known for is putting together this what she calls an embodied philology, or I think, Jason, you came up with the term on your platform, the luminescence, on this with this idea of people that we know. I think it was Philippa and
Ruth,
who's the other? Ruth.
Westerby. They're all dedicated and well-known senior Ashtanga teachers in London, who were colleagues and friends of Mark Singleton. So he put us in touch with practitioners that he thought were capable. And when we start to talk about the practice that was described in the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati, it's quite an extraordinary, difficult and challenging practice. And so we needed practitioners that were at the extreme end of capability, if you like. It wasn't something that we could get ordinary practitioners off the street to do. We needed people that had 20 to 25 years of practice under their belt and could call upon their practice in order to undertake this idea, like you say, embodied philology, this idea of reconstructing a practice that doesn't exist. It's only been documented in Sanskrit, and we're trying to interpret that practice and bring it to life, because it doesn't exist in its current form. So when we look at Ashtanga Vinyasa of Pattabhi Joyce of Krishnamacharya, this is different. It's a living practice. What we're trying to do was reconstruct a practice that had been documented probably in the 18th century. And interpret it quite faithfully. That's, I guess, one of the challenges is interpreting that practice faithful to the time and faithful to the documenters of that period. And this was one of the challenges with working with practitioners of Ashtanga Vinyasa, because the request that we had of them was to put that, so bring to the table your wonderful dedication and skill as Ashtanga practitioners, but also put that to one side, because we need you to embody what we say quite precisely and not have the influence of a contemporary practice. And so that was sort of what we were attempting to do.
And what happened? I mean, I brought it into the table maybe earlier than I was going to in the interview, but I think it's really, a seminal kind of part of your work most recently, and it's fascinating what you did. And so, I mean, again, to explain it for readers that don't know exactly what happened, is that there was a bunch of scholars, I think, Mark and Jim Mallison and Jason and a number of others. I think it was SOAS University, right? And James Mallison was reading the descriptions, as I understand, from the Paddhati, and then Philippa, Aggie, and Ruth were trying to, as he was reading it, were trying to then replicate the postures as he was reading it. Is that right?
It has a bit of a prehistory. So that event was the coming together of a couple of years of work. So that event took place at SOAS University of London, and we have film of that, so you can sort of see some of that on YouTube.
Where is the film? I've been looking on YouTube for the bloody film, but I can't find it. The actual reconstruction hasn't been
completely revealed yet, but I'll tell you why in a second. But so the process of what we call embodied philology was actually something Jason and I had been pursuing prior to the Hatha Yoga project, mainly just because of our self-interest. We had, Jason's work had enabled, several decades of field work in India looking for manuscripts, and I think you've spoken to him about that. And at the time, at the end of his doctoral thesis, he'd already submitted and defended that. And there was a wonderful conference happening in Vienna, the Yoga and Transformation volume. You probably saw that, a nice big open access purple volume that you can download from the Vienna University. When this conference took place,
it's excellent.
He discovered the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati, a manual, by chance during some field work in a library near Pune.
I mean, you have to tell us, tell us the story of the. I mean, let's park the philology. Just tell us the story between the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati and the Paddhati, and how Norman Soyman comes to the equation, because I did hear that.
Oh yeah, that's
it's an amazing discovery.
That's a little later, but so finding the manuscript was one thing. So finding the manuscript means that we were able to, find these descriptions, very obscure and terse descriptions of a practice of yoga that included 112 asanas. Then we were trying to reconstruct that ourselves, Jason and I, in Singapore. We were living at the time, working with the text. And it was during that phase that we realized that there was a connection between the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati's textual work, which we discovered, and that of the Sri Tattvanidhi. And it was that relationship, identifying that relationship, that really enabled us to move forward quite quickly with this idea of reconstructing the practice, because all of a sudden, not only did we have a textual description, we also had a visual cue, so an artistic cue, because the Sri Tattvanidhi is a manual, 18th century manual that's been illustrated, 19th century illustrated manuscript. And by connecting those two, all of a sudden we had two resources, or two pieces of evidence that we could use to reconstruct a practice. And the formulation of what's called...
So one refers to the other.
Well, it's a really interesting relationship, and it was like part of the presentation that Jason gave in the Yoga and Transformation, was that the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati preserves a sequence and a complete practice, and then that was interpreted or documented in the Sri Tattvanidhi probably about 100 years later. But it was all mixed up, it was all jumbled, and the artists just documented, like they preserve the text, and they preserve or decided to provide an artistic representation, but the asanas are not in order, so they're all over the place. And so when Norman Soyman was working in the 80s and the 90s in the Mysore Palace, working with the Maharaj of Mysore at that time, and he chose to study the yoga asana section of the Sri Tattvanidhi. He published that, and we'd all know that book, the Mysore Traditions of the Yoga of the Mysore Palace, the Traditions of the Mysore Palace. Traditions of the Mysore Palace. No, I got that wrong as well. Don't worry. He wasn't aware of the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati, and he published the asanas. But it's a little hard to know what's going on, because the asanas he published obviously are just in order as they appear in the Sri Tattvanidhi. And it's a little bit disconnected from a complete practice, which is preserved, thankfully, in the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati.
Yeah. It gives you some idea, but I liked the first part, but then when it gets to the asanas, you just kind of think, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about that, right? Than just flipping through the asana pages.
And they were preserved, by the Maharaj of Mysore at the time, because he was trying to ensure that the culture of Mysore was preserved. And so this Sri Tattvanidhi is an amazing document, because it doesn't just document asanas and yoga, it also documents games, the religious life.
Does it?
I didn't know that. Extraordinary book, and it's
right. So it's a larger text,
it's 9 volumes, and it's beautifully illustrated. So it's a really wonderful cultural piece of history that we can refer to. But it doesn't look at anything in a lot of detail, so it just gives you a taste. And that was what we got with the Sri Tattvanidhi, a taste of what yoga asana was in the 1850s. And so
did you get to see it? Because I don't think anyone's seen it since Norman, right? There's no access being granted, I believe, since Norman saw it.
still unfortunately denied, and that's still the case. Yeah. So the challenge was for Jason and I. We had this theory that they're connected. The Sri Tattvanidhi and the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati, they're connected, but there's a gap of about 100 years, and we had hypothesized that the artists of the Mysore Palace must have a version of the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati in the royal collection. And we went and we were able to, through connections with Philippa, actually really helped us a lot to make connections with important artistic community in Mysore, and also enabled us to meet with the Maharani of Mysore. So we've had several years of conversations that are ongoing with the Maharani in Mysore to see what we believe.
She's saying, I know you've got this text.
Exactly.
Can we see it?
We hypothesized in the beginning. We went and met, we gave a little presentation, and we hypothesized that we thought this manuscript sits there, and we'd really love to sort of look at your archive, but for reasons outside of her control, she's not able to open that, give access to the scholars to that. And so we left disappointed, and when we tried for several years. You know, we're not talking about a fly-in, fly-out visit. We're talking about sitting with people and negotiating and talking and revisiting the Mysore Palace over a couple of times, and you know, it's an ongoing conversation we're still in, by the way. So it was just by luck. Okay.
So it's still a possibility. What about a bit of bribery? We're going to try a bit of bribery. You know, grease a few palms. Yeah.
Well, we have been invited back.
It was worth a go.
We have been invited back, and yes, there is some very positive news on that side. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask you, where did you find the Paddhati in the first place? The Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati. Where was that found?
And it was miscatalogued, actually. Okay. So Jason and I had been going around to a lot of collections and libraries and and in remote places, so looking, and a lot of these manuscripts had been catalogued. So a lot of the manuscripts on Hatha Yoga are catalogued, and we know sort of where collections might be. During the 18th century, some of these private collections sort of got dispersed or moved into different regional libraries. So sometimes you go there thinking something might be there and it's not there. But we were lucky enough, actually, I wasn't there on that trip, but Jason had a specific library he wanted to go to, and he was able to locate the manuscript. And it was by luck, really, because he'd ordered everything under the term Hatha, and it didn't appear, and nothing came up under the word yoga. And it was under a miscatalogued manuscript that he found the Paddhati by accident. So it was a bit of luck, really.
Incredible.
That led to...
Yeah. Well, he's pretty thorough. I mean, we can definitely say of Jason that he definitely lets no stone be unturned.
Yeah, so it was a bit of...
So, luck and I think diligence as well, probably on his part. I'm sure, yeah. So
the bit about... you wanted to ask about how do we get to Norman Scheumann and all of this and his work?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Well, it was a fascinating story, and I love to hear that discovery that you found. And knowing Norman as well from a previous interview that we've done on Keen and Yoga with Norman, I can only kind of imagine the whole situation, because Norman is such a character, as we know. So, I had this picture in my head, and I wanted to hear it from you. Yeah,
Norman is an amazing man, and we had been in touch with him because we were going to Canada for the World Sanskrit Conference, and so it was an opportunity for us to be in the same country as Norman, and we had made contact with him, and he lived in Calgary. We were going to be in British Columbia or something, so it wasn't exactly an easy journey. But we had contacted him and said, would you mind if we come and see you? And if you don't mind, could we view your photographs of the Sri Tattvanidhi, because again, we still haven't been able to see it in person. So we just wanted to see his original photographs in case there were things that we could potentially have missed or something that weren't put in his original publication. So we were kind of looking for pages either side of the document, if you know what I mean, anything that could be there, a scribbled note or anything that he may have accidentally captured and hadn't thought was significant in the 90s. So he kindly invited us to stay at his home, and it's an extraordinary place. He's got a wonderful collection of artworks and just beautiful.
Yeah,
we attended, he has a yoga class that we attended in his basement, but he also allowed us to stay for a couple of nights in his attic. And he, at the final day, we were only able to stay a couple of days. He said, okay, I'll get those images for you. Oh, they're on my computer, the images of the Sri Tattvanidhi, and you can have a look at them. And then when he went to have a look, they weren't there actually. The digitized version had been corrupted and he only had one photo. And so he said, oh, don't panic. I've got the original slides up in my attic somewhere. I'll go and get the Kodak slides. And so off he went up into the attic to get these. And he came down with a couple of boxes, but by this time it was about 8 o'clock in the evening and we were due to leave, 6 a.m. the next day. And so we're looking at these sort of old Kodak slides through, those light boxes and things, trying to go through the images. And they were both boxes were marked as the Sri Tattvanidhi. So we weren't expecting anything else, nor was he. But as we moved through the second box, we saw that there was another manuscript documented there. And thankfully, Jason is, able to very well read the folios. There happened to be a folio with some Sanskrit verse on it, not just because Norman was particularly interested in the art history. So he was photographing visual art, not necessarily the texts. And so it just happened that on one of his slides, he captured one folio with some of the text. And it was through that we could identify that it was the Haṭhābhyāsapaddhati. And here it was. Now we kind of, Norman back in these Kodak slides were photographed in 1986, so well before his publication of the Sri Tattvanidhi.
Yeah.
But he wasn't interested in this particular manual because the Sri Tattvanidhi is so much more beautifully illustrated and captured what he wanted to present as the climax, if you like, of the artistic and yogic history of the Mysore region. And so, but as historians, we're a little bit interested in where did it come from and so forth. So for us, it was this other piece of history that had been sitting by chance. And here it was, we now had not only our hypothesis that we've been trying to communicate with people in Mysore, but we had it affirmed that our hypothesis was 100% spot on. And here it was documented in 1986 in photos captured by Norman by accident, and there it was. So we now know that it's there, and we immediately after that returned to Mysore and said, not only do we know what it looks like, and here it is, but that again we're still in negotiations about that. So yes, but all of that evidence is all of this work, and it's a really slow process. I know people are really, people are really like,
it sounds it.
Where's that film? I'm like, I would love to just publish the film, but to us, there's some key pieces of the puzzle that have to fit into place, and we've got our ideas of what they are, and we could speedily do this, and we could do it in, social media speed, if you like, and just put up a film that has all of,
Well, I'd say put up a few teasers. Why not?
True.
Just,
yes.
A couple of little reels.
So we did publish two of the sequences in an exhibition that we held at the Brunei Gallery in London. And those that were able to attend the exhibition were able to see those reconstructions of the two sequences. And it is possible that I might release those as tasters. But to be honest, we were just kind of waiting for this other piece of the puzzle to fall into place.
Okay.
And we're hoping that happens. In fact, I'm currently in Germany, and I'm meant to be in Mysore, but I injured my ankle, and I'm afraid that's actually put a little bit of a spanner in the works. But hopefully we'll get there by November.
Well,
Yeah.
because I think you were mentioning that. I think that it was meant to be originally the idea of the film was meant to be out a couple of years ago. I think, right? But I suppose you were hampered by COVID, etc.
Well, it was part of. So I put it.
Been looking everywhere for it.
Yes, I haven't put it online. I published two sequences for the Brunei Gallery exhibition, but I didn't put it online, mainly because we are in negotiations, and we are trying to make this little piece of the puzzle fall into place. And we're very close now. In fact, like I said, we're meant to be in Mysore now. It looks like we won't be there till November. And there's a lot of, we're dealing with personal history. We're dealing with people's private collections, and we're dealing with a family's history. So what we do with that material, we have to be quite sensitive with that. I know there's a hungry demand within the Ashtanga community for this material, but there's also sort of delicate sides to dealing with historical material.
Yeah, of course.